I was 41 the day my aunt called me a beggar in front of 200 people, at my own father's funeral, in a church I had paid to rent. 6 words did it. She's just here for money. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I picked up my folder, thanked the usher, and walked out the side door into the parking lot, where I sat in my car for exactly 4 minutes before I called my father's attorney. I count things for a living. That day, I counted exits. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories New, the channel where quiet people keep the receipts and family learns that boundaries have a price. If stories about dignity, documents, and consequences are your thing, drop a comment and subscribe. I am a forensic accountant. 17 years now. People think the job is about numbers, but it isn't. It's about patterns. Somewhere around year 3, you stop being able to turn it off. You watch a couple split a restaurant bill, and you already know which one is subsidizing the marriage. You watch a family gather at a funeral, and you already know, before anyone says a word, who paid for the flowers and who simply stood near them. My father, Walter, built a mid-sized manufacturing supply company from a single delivery van in 1979. By the time I was in college, it had 4 warehouses and a name people in 3 states recognized. He was not a warm man in the way people mean it in movies. He was warm the way a well-built house is warm, steady load-bearing, present in every room whether you noticed it or not. He taught me to read a balance sheet before I could parallel park. He used to say, "Numbers don't lie, but people lie about numbers, so learn to read both." My marriage to my late husband, Daniel, lasted 11 years before cancer took him, quietly and without spectacle, the way he did most things. We never had children. After he died, my father became the person I called on Sunday nights, not out of obligation, but because the silence in my house needed a familiar voice in it. He never once made me feel like the widow at the table. He just kept setting a place. My family is smaller than it looks from the outside, and more expensive than it looks from the inside. My younger brother Marcus runs a car dealership that has never, in the 11 years I have watched its books from a courteous distance, turned an actual profit. My Aunt Diane, my father's older sister, has spent 4 decades perfecting the art of being present exactly when there is something to receive and unavailable exactly when there is something to give. And there was me, the one who flew in for every hospital scare, the one who quietly paid Marcus's dealership rent twice, in 2019, and again in 2022, and never mentioned it at Thanksgiving. The one who drove my father to 14 months of chemotherapy appointments while keeping a spreadsheet, out of habit, not for reimbursement, just because that is what my hands do when my chest is doing something else. The family ran on a simple arithmetic they never said out loud. I was the ledger, and everyone else was the expense. I paid, I absorbed, I fixed, and in exchange I was allowed to keep showing up. Nobody ever called it a transaction. Nobody ever had to. That's the elegant cruelty of unspoken arithmetic. You can run it for 20 years without a single party ever signing anything. My father died on a Tuesday in March, at 6:47 in the morning, in the room where he had asked to be, with the window cracked the way he liked it even in cold weather. I was the one who found the number that mattered most that day, and I did not learn it until 9 days later, but I want you to remember it now. 6:47. Hold on to it. The funeral was 11 days after that. I paid the deposit on the venue, $4,100, because Marcus said he was cash poor this month, and Diane said funerals were not really her department. I did not argue. I had stopped arguing about money in this family around the time I turned 30. I simply paid, the way I always had, and I told myself it was for my father, not for them, which was true, and which is exactly the kind of true thing people used to keep paying for decades. The betrayal did not arrive slowly. It arrived at 2:14 in the afternoon, during the reception, in front of the guest book table. I had gone to the front of the room, the way any daughter might, to say a few words about the man in the photograph on the easel. I had a folder in my hand, not documents yet, just 3 index cards with notes for what I wanted to say about him. Diane intercepted me before I reached the podium. She put her hand flat on my folder like she was stopping a car. "We already have someone speaking," she said. "You don't need to make this about you." I told her I only wanted 3 minutes. She said, loudly enough for the row behind us to hear, "She always needs something. Even here." And then Marcus, standing just behind her, said the 6 words that ended up costing him more than he will ever be able to calculate. "She's just here for money." 200 people heard it. I know, because I counted the folding chairs when I rented them. I did not correct him. I did not defend myself. Correcting a false accusation in public is a young person's instinct. I had aged out of it. Instead, the habit that has kept me employed for 17 years simply switched on. The way it does at a client site when someone says a number that doesn't match the ledger. I took out my phone. I took a photograph of the guest book, opened to that page, timestamped 2:14 p.m., with Diane's and Marcus's names signed at the top in their own handwriting, 20 minutes earlier, right above the line where they had written, in Diane's looping cursive, "Forever grateful for everything he gave us." I walked to my car. I sat with that photograph on my screen for 4 minutes, and I did not cry. I looked at the timestamp until it stopped looking like a number, and started looking like evidence. My father's attorney, a soft-spoken man named Elliot Farrow who had handled his affairs for over 20 years, had asked all 3 of us, Marcus, Diane, and me, to come to his office 6 days after the funeral for what he called the reading. A phrase that sounds like something out of an old film and is, in real life, mostly paperwork and awkward silence. Elliot's office had the particular quiet of a room built for delivering news that cannot be taken back. He read the will slowly, the way a man reads something he has read many times before, but knows the room is hearing for the first time. My father's company, Halberd Supply, the business built from one van in 1979, was not simply divided among the 3 of us, as everyone in that room, including me, had quietly assumed for years. It had been placed 18 months earlier into a private trust. The trust held 60% of company shares. Marcus and Diane were named as income beneficiaries only, meaning they would receive distributions, but never control. The remaining shares, and the single seat that mattered, the seat of chairwoman of the board, had been assigned by name, in a codicil dated 14 months before his death, to me. Diane's face did something I had never seen it do before. It went completely still. There was a second document, smaller, folded inside the trust paperwork in an envelope with my name on it in my father's handwriting. It was not a formal instrument. It was a letter, 2 paragraphs, written the year before he died. Elliot let me read it alone, in the small conference room next door, while Marcus and Diane waited outside arguing about the parking meter, which even in that moment struck me as exactly the kind of thing they would find urgent. The letter said very little about money. It said this: "You were never the one who owed this family. You were the one who kept its books honest when no one else would. That is not a debt. That is a character. I am simply making the paperwork match what has always been true." And one more line near the bottom, that I will come back to, because it is the line that ends this story. "Calm was never your weakness. It was the only thing in this family that was load-bearing." I read the letter 3 times. I did not act. I put it in my bag, drove home, and read it 3 more times that night, at my kitchen table, with the guest book photograph open on my phone beside it. Word travels fast in a family that has spent decades assuming it knew what was coming to it. Within 9 days, Marcus called twice and texted 6 times. The texts are still on my phone, and I want to read you exactly what they said, because paraphrasing them would do them a kindness they do not deserve. "We need to talk about Dad's company. Obviously it's split 3 ways, everyone knows that. Diane says the dealership needs a cash injection this quarter. Family money should go to family first. He would have wanted us all equal, you know that." Diane called once, and did not text, because Diane has never trusted anything she couldn't later deny having said. In that call, she used a phrase I want you to remember. "It's family money. It doesn't belong to one person just because her name is on a piece of paper." I did not tell her which piece of paper. Marcus came to my house on a Thursday evening, uninvited, holding a bottle of wine like a peace offering that was actually an invoice. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had read the letter 3 times, and told me, without a trace of irony, that the dealership was going to need $80,000 by the end of the quarter, and that obviously, now that things are settled, I would be the one to help. I asked him one question. Settled how exactly? He didn't have an answer for that. He talked instead about family, about Dad, about how none of us really know what Dad wanted. We're just guessing. I let the silence sit there long enough to become uncomfortable, and then I told him I had a work call in the morning and needed to sleep. He left with the wine still in the bag. That night I called Elliot. I told him 3 words. Send the letters. If you've ever watched people who couldn't spare one afternoon suddenly find all the time in the world when money is involved, you already know exactly where this goes. Stick with me. Diane organized what she called a family gathering, 2 weeks later, at her house, ostensibly to honor Dad's memory properly, the way it should have been done. I understood immediately what it actually was. It was an intervention, dressed as a memorial, designed to pressure me into signing away control before the trust documents became public knowledge among the extended family, the cousins, the people who might start asking Diane and Marcus uncomfortable questions about why the woman who paid for everything for 20 years wasn't automatically running the company now that it mattered. I accepted the invitation. I brought a folder. Not index cards this time. The gathering was held in Diane's dining room. 14 people, a buffet, a framed photograph of my father on the sideboard between 2 candles. Diane stood first and gave what she clearly considered a toast, but which was, in substance, a verdict delivered as a foregone conclusion. She talked about keeping the company and the family, all of us, equally, the way Walter always intended, and she raised her glass and several cousins raised theirs, and Marcus watched me the way a man watches a door he expects someone to walk through any minute. Then Diane looked at me and said, with the particular kindness people use right before they ask you to disappear quietly, "Do you have anything you want to add?" She meant it as a formality. She was giving me the floor because she believed I was about to concede it. I stood. I opened the folder. I did not raise my voice. I named the first document. The trust instrument, dated 18 months before his death, filed with the county, a matter of public record now that probate had opened. I read the line that named the beneficiaries and the line, 3 paragraphs later, that named the sole trustee and chair of the board. I placed the printed page on the table, face up, and let it sit there. Diane's face went from confident to careful. Marcus's went from careful to loud. "This isn't right, he wouldn't have done this without telling us," he said, and his voice climbed the way voices do when the facts stop cooperating. I answered him in the same volume I'd used for the first document. Quieter, actually. "He told me," I said. 14 months before he died. In writing. I placed the second document on the table. The guest book photograph, printed, timestamped 2:14 p.m., the day of the funeral, Diane's and Marcus's signatures visible above the words, "Forever grateful for everything he gave us." And beneath it, the transcript I had written that same day in my car, word for word, of what Marcus had said about me 20 minutes after signing that book. "She's just here for money." The room went from loud to something closer to silent. One cousin, a younger woman named Priya who I had always liked and rarely saw, looked down at her hands. I noticed. I did not need her to say anything. Her conscience showing up 9 days late doesn't erase 9 days, but I registered it, the way you register a small credit on an otherwise damning ledger. It does not offset the balance. It is simply noted. Diane tried one more move, soft again, the tone she uses when she wants witnesses to remember her as reasonable. "We're not saying you didn't deserve something. We're saying family should share." I let that sit in the air for 3 full seconds before I answered. "You didn't call me family 9 days ago. You called me a beggar. In front of 200 people. At the rental I paid $4,100 to reserve." I took out the last item. Not a document. A photograph of my father, the one from his desk, the one I'd had since childhood, taken at 6:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in March, the exact time the hospice nurse recorded as his time of death, because I had asked her to note it, and I had written it in my own hand on the back of the frame the day I found him. I set it on the table between the guest book photograph and the trust document, and I said the only sentence that mattered. He gave me the time. You took the funeral. I think we're square. I picked up my folder. I did not wait for a response. I told Diane the wine was very good, thanked her for hosting, and left through the front door, the same way I had left the church, quiet, unhurried, on my own schedule. Halberd Supply is still operating today, under my chairmanship, with Marcus and Diane receiving their income distributions exactly as the trust specifies. No more, no less, and no seat at the table where decisions are made. The $80,000 Marcus asked me for was never paid. His dealership closed its doors 11 months later. A fact I learned the same way I learn most facts about my family now. Through public filings, not phone calls. Diane calls twice a year, at Christmas and on my father's birthday, and I answer briefly, politely, the way you answer a colleague you no longer report to. Priya, the cousin who looked down at her hands that night, sent me a short note 2 weeks later. It did not apologize for anyone else. It simply said she was glad I had my father's letter, and that she hoped I knew people had noticed more than they said out loud that evening. I keep that note in the same folder as everything else. It does not change what happened. It is simply the one entry in this ledger that was never a debit. The guest book photograph sits, printed and framed, in a drawer in my office, not on display, not hidden. I do not need to look at it to remember what it proved. It has done its work. Some evidence you frame for the room, and some you simply file because its job was never decoration. It was proof, and proof does not need an audience once the case is closed. I did not take the chairmanship as revenge, and I want to be precise about that, the way I am precise about everything, because precision is the only kind of honesty I have ever fully trusted. I took it because my name was already on the paper, in my father's handwriting, 14 months before he died. What I did afterward was not vengeance. It was simply the closing of an account that had been running, unpaid, in the wrong direction, for 20 years. I stopped making payments on a debt I never actually agreed to carry. With the first year's dividend, I did not buy anything for myself. I funded a scholarship at the technical college where my father took night classes in bookkeeping in 1974, 3 years before he ever owned a single delivery van. It carries his name, and it goes every year, to a student who works full-time while studying, the way he did. That is not revenge adjacent. It is simply the right use of a number. People confuse quiet with weak. My family had confused the two for as long as I could remember. Calm was never my weakness. It was the only thing in that family that was load-bearing. And in the end, it was the only thing left standing when everyone else's noise had nowhere left to go. If it reminded you that quiet people keep the receipts, and that boundaries are allowed even with blood, take that as your sign. Update what needs updating. Tell someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.